The 12th house of inhibition, secrets, loneliness, privacy, sometimes meditation, spirituality, imprisonment, bondage, known to be associated with asylums and hospitals. And esoterically, it is a house of self-sacrifice and service to humanity. So these are all Piscean themes here. The 12th house is the furthest away from the first house of consciousness, of the me, of the I, of the identity, the personality in its obvious sense, and also the head and that conscious aspect of the ego. We play with it psychologically. So then the 12th house is necessarily the unconscious. It's the furthest away from the first house. We have to go all the way around. And if we think about that direction of journeying through the houses, journeying through the signs, and then coming to the end cycle in Pisces, we're going to have all of that which has not been dealt with, all of that which has been accumulated, all of that which is being held within the unconscious psyche. And here is where we get those delineations of, or associations with, inhibition and past karma, karmic debts, things that need to be released. And if we don't become conscious of them, they become the self-undoing, the self-sabotage. And we'll get to that in a little bit. The 12th house is that furthest away from the first. So that all of that unconscious material in the psyche, and also the collective psyche. Because when we go deep enough into that which is ours in the hidden depths, eventually something turns over and it moves out into others and the collective. This is the unity aspect of Pisces, the Neptunian boundarylessness. And there can also be issues with boundaries and a lack of differentiation, just as we can see with prominent Piscean placements in the chart as well. This is the empath problem, psychic sensitivity, and we do see a lot of psychic empathic sensitivity in the 12th house, which isn't inherently a spiritual virtue, by the way. It is a challenge and something to be integrated. But when it is integrated, then we have the higher aspect of Pisces, which is the compassion. It is the love of humanity. It is the universality of the love principle. That's Neptune as well through Cancer, which is the other sign of mass consciousness, and associated with the 4th house, which is also can be connected to collective consciousness, the roots, collective ancestry, right? There's a Neptunian quality there as well. So that Neptunian quality in its shadow side brings us back to bondage or addictions, or all of that. Let's say if we just approach it psychologically, anything that we turn away from in psyche, if we don't own it within ourselves, that's something that will become a saboteur. It's like this is a creative potential here, whatever this is. And the more we turn away from it, the more grotesque and warped it becomes, and it turns into a dragon that can come and devour us. We see that a little bit in the 8th house as well, material to be regenerated. And they are, Pisces and Scorpio, both have a connection to Pluto, because Pluto is the esoteric ruler of Pisces, and it serves esoterically to destroy all of that which inhibits the soul force. So that's starting to hint at some of the esoteric material there. But even at the psychological level, when we can turn away, or turn to rather, that dragon, and really contend with what that is, and to accept the consequences of living the truth. That's the Christ, Pisces, of living the truth, then that can be turned into a salvation. That is the saving force that saves us. It is that which turns into the sacrificial self-service, which merges us with the collective into that unity consciousness and extends us out into the archetype of the world savior that we find in Pisces and in the 12th house. And we spoke about the world server in Aquarius in our 11th house video as well. And so that Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, the 10th, 11th and 12th houses, from the esoteric view now, become very important. Like these energies start to impress upon us more because they are so collective in nature. The mental illness that we can see in the 12th house is part of this bondage. So if we imagine all of that inverted force that we just touched on, it can swallow us up. So when there has been a deep rejection of the self maybe, or these aspects of these energies, or if we've turned away from that need to take responsibility for bearing the cross. It's probationary path stuff again in Pisces. You accept the consequences of living the truth. If we don't do that, and there are all these other factors that make whatever we're carrying very dark or twisted or difficult to manage, then this is where the psychic waters come and they swallow us up. This again, so if we think about this thing of individuation or self-sacrifice and becoming more than the limitations of the self, that is a turning towards the collective, starting with your own self and your own psyche, right? It's the collective of your own material, and you move into that and you occupy that. So now I'm in that, and that broadens out your sphere of relationship, and eventually that will turn into the collective, certainly at the esoteric level. So again, it's these waters that if we don't relate to them, when we turn away and we're like, no, I'm going to preserve my egoism, and this is the bondage piece. And like, if the ego doesn't die, then it'll get sucked in to those waters, and there you get the insanities. It's like, oh no, and then you're the drowning man in Pisces, or the siren that takes the man being symbolic in terms of the gender of the principle of consciousness or the ego, gets swallowed up by those archetypal waters, by all of that material. And here, that's the connection concretely to asylums or even hospitals, because this is where in terms of how those karmic debts can manifest through the body or through the physical, and taking us to death and Pluto once again as the esoteric ruler of Pisces. So this death thing and the death theme endings all of this here. So this need to take responsibility for relationship. I think it's so interesting as I say that, because now I'm thinking about Venus being exalted in Pisces, which is a relational sign and a relational planet, and esoterically is the planet of the fifth ray, which harmonizes the opposite. So in Pisces, the esoteric delineation of its exaltation is that once Pluto cuts the thread, like it kills off the limitations of the egoism, of the personality that are keeping all of that energy stuck. Pluto cuts through, releases the soul, releases the form, releases the truth of the divine expression, the Christ self. And then Venus comes and joins substance, matter, and divinity and spirit back together again. And then we get the higher thing of the marriage. So it's interesting, this principle of relatedness, as I'm using those words, talking about this 12th house, relating to, with responsibility and maturity, to our karma, to the debts, and getting into life, taking responsibility. So this is somewhat of a treatise on the karmic component of the 12th house, because people can refer to it in a vague way, or, oh yeah, it can represent past life stuff, or da-da. But what does that really mean? So I'm hoping that the way I'm describing it can give you a bit more of a felt sense of what consciousness is really doing in those processes of that emerging or merging and then emerging with and through all of this substance. So esoterically, the consequence of that, we've kind of inferred it already, is then becoming the universal compassionate one, all of that which we redeem. It's the redemption of matter. That's the Pisces, Pluto, rebirth through the death and transformation. That gets redeemed and becomes a beacon of light that we serve others with. And that is the universal compassion. And when we really take our own human suffering to the core of its roots and really transfigure that and really contend with that, of course it brings about universal compassion, because we see, even though we've all got different levels of karma and the different stories and different traumas, at the root it's all a variation of fundamentally this separation from divinity. And that brings, when we get to the core of our own suffering, it takes us into that portal where it's like through the deepest level of the subjective, it takes us into the collective, through the deepest level of that individuality into that collective. And it's kind of the death and the rebirth, Pisces back into Aries or something like that. New level of identity, collective identity. And it gives us a personal sense of compassion towards the suffering and the challenges and the struggle of the human condition. Planets in the 12th house, if there aren't any planets in there, you look to the planetary rulers of the sign, of course. Planets there are going to highlight these points of challenge when it comes to redemption, release, and certainly at the psychological level, which has been pretty well established and documented elsewhere, this claiming of those energies. So I'm a 12th house person. I've got 3 planets in the 12th house in whole signs, 2 in Placidus. And both, or that includes Sun and Mercury. So Sun is quite difficult. There's a loss of identity or a hidden identity, the hidden gift, the hidden radiance. There can be vitality issues, insomnia, sleep issues, restoration, that like sensitivity to all of that psychic astral material that like really gets aggravated, particularly at night, because the night is ruled by the moon, and so the astral body gets really elevated up. So this is why we can see, and with other planets as well, sleep and restoration and these kinds of health issues, vitality issues, chronic health issues. Same with the 8th house, but certainly insomnia and sleep in the 12th house. And so for me as a 12th house Sun, really difficult process of claiming the gift and claiming the voice too in the communication, the true voice. I was a Gemini person, right? So I was always the gift of the gab comes with Gemini as that general territory anyway, but the true voice of the self, the intimate voice, what is it that I really want to say? So suppression, repression, it can often show up with planets, whatever is in there, maybe the family context or the group environment that you're in really inhibited that. You can't express your anger, Mars in the 12th, or your desires. And again, if you don't claim that and come into conscious relationship with it, it can come and sneak up and destroy you through an addiction or through blasting out impulsively. And that your shadow can come out and come into the foreground when we least expect it. So Sun, identity, and needing to claim the voice, and also we would say something like the health and in the case of the Sun, vitality struggles. So you need to help heal that would be to really dig deep and claim that vital energy through the expression. So there's something about having the issue you solve through the reclamation of that planetary body or whatever the theme is going on there in the 12th house. Same with also potentially the energies of the zodiacal sign and the rays as well. I would say generally any personal planets as well as Pluto, because it is a Pluto house, Pluto-Neptune house in its Piscean orientation, there's often going to be the trauma connection as well, or which kind of almost goes without saying, given that we're talking about unredeemed past karma or potential ancestry issues and all of this. So the baggage that one is carrying has to be dealt with. For the collective planets or the bigger planets, Neptune, Uranus, these can have exoteric effects. I heard someone say for Uranus in the 12th, that could be, really need to make sure you're not messing with electronics at night because you're really sensitive to that energy or something like that. But from an esoteric standpoint, what I would say is that those planets are going to be a little bit muted until one starts to really anchor onto the fixed cross and work with the soul, because those planets, these larger planets and the sacred planets, are really evocative of planetary service at the esoteric level. So they are something that maybe come online in a dynamic way when we polarize into the soul. Jupiter can be quite a positive one typically to have there, because Jupiter is buoyant and optimistic, and then esoterically it is love, wisdom, it is experience, it is learning, it is growth. So there could still be harsh issues. I know someone personally who has a really prominent Jupiter 12th house who really suffered a lot, but they really were able to alchemize that in a brilliant way, and that was a Jupiter in Cancer person. So that's Jupiter in its exaltation as well. And just knowing a bit about their past, things could have gone a lot worse. So that's the Jupiter in the 12th can be sometimes the hidden guardian angel, just like the idea of the love principle, and Jupiter is the sacred planet ruler of the second ray. So it's something that's kind of guiding, or a bit more connection to the higher self or the spiritual purpose that's somehow imbuing itself onto the life there, and then can then be transformed into the guru or the teacher, or that principle of Jupiter in this house of self-sacrifice and service, and the gifting of that onto humanity once that's been claimed. So that can be quite a nice one there. A very interesting planet in the 12th house to think about is Saturn, which in some of the traditional forms of astrology is considered to have its joy in the 12th house, but from the traditional perspective, that's not a good thing that you might think, as good as the thing that you might think, because it would be something like the 12th house is a bad malefic house, of illness and undoing and hidden secrets and sabotage and hidden enemies, which would be a concrete manifestation of the subversive psychic forces, right? So Saturn as a malefic in the 12th house, which is a malefic house, can get up to its real malefic nefariousness. So we might say exile is one of those older manifestations, particularly of the 12th house, because that would be the self-undoing forces that remove you from the society or the culture or the family. That's, again, 12th house is away from, and I think in Vedic it's often can be associated with foreign lands as well for that reason. It's furthest away from what you know as a self in the first house. So, and this is the isolation thing, and which I didn't touch on before, but isolation in the 12th house, it's one of those things where we need to take responsibility for withdrawing from the collective to connect to the divine. That's the higher aspect of Pisces in terms of prayer, meditation, connecting to the divine, mediatorship as opposed to mediumship, the lower octave, blind psychic sensitivity. Mediatorship, connecting into the divine self, and then being able to extend that back out. If we don't voluntarily accept the isolation that is needed to connect to the self, coming back to relatedness that I was using before, that word of relating to the truth, relating, taking responsibility to it. If we don't take responsibility for that process of necessary isolation to promote connection, then that can show up as a shadowy energy of the loneliness or getting exiled, or that, again, anything that we turn away from. So Saturn's, or rather not Saturn, but the 12th house in its propensity towards isolation will tell you, you need to retreat to come to see this and come into relationship with this. You need to still the noise and get out of the Piscean mass consciousness reactivity and go, what's going on? Retreat, meditate, rest, connect. What is the truth? So if that doesn't happen consciously, that can show up as a self-undoing force where it comes and slaps you on the head. So back to Saturn, yes, that could be an emphasis on that loneliness thing, because Saturn can bring some of those harsh themes with its associations as well, connections. Capricorn and the mountaintop as well. But what else do I want to say about Saturn? So yeah, the negativity there, the isolation, and just a real hard edge to all of the themes that we've been talking about already with the 12th house. So more problems with mental illness, the inner critic or those inner psychic forces that are subversive and saboteurs being crystallized even more into the mental thought forms, right? But esoterically, Saturn is the planet of occult discipleship. So the planet of occult discipleship in the house of collective service. Of course, Saturn is harsh though, because exoterically it's the ruler of Capricorn and can represent all of that. It's in the same way that Pisces is about overcoming. You got to claim the energies and release and move into self-sacrifice and this kenotic practice that Jesus spoke about, right? Self-emptying, like you got to pour it back out to bring this energy into its proper expression. Saturn is this place where we have to overcome those crystallized thought forms. That's the crystallization of the Capricorn mountain in its shadowy sense. So all of that, which is... That's why it's the dweller on the threshold. And that's why it's got the rings around it. So of course it's harsh in that sense. But if we claim, and of course at the higher levels of initiation, when we start approaching the third initiation, then we're really dealing with the Saturnian problem, overcoming the limitations of the mind, because the mental body is the final thing that we need to conquer. But then on the upward turn of that, when we can claim that energy and really work with the mental body, and we're fully stepping into that that self-sacrifice and the world service, then we've got the mastery of the mental body as the concrete builder, as the pattern maker, constructor, higher level of Capricorn, which Saturn also rules esoterically. Saturn is exalted in Libra, sign of truth, of the bridging of the opposites, spirit and matter, justice. So in this 12th house. So it's just something to play with there. Yes, it's a harsh placement if you've got it there exoterically. And can be, there's a lot that has to be dealt with, and you have to integrate, again, anything in the 12th house, you're going to have to integrate, certainly at the psychological level, if nothing else, or I should say, even at the psychological level of personality astrology, you have to integrate it. So Saturn would be, you've got to integrate the mental organizing principle. You've got to work with the masculine energies of concentration and focus and the building faculty, the concretization. You've got to take that back rather than that being the devil ruling over the material plane, with all of that inversion of the third ray force, which is the mental body, but then the first ray energy of Capricorn. And Saturn and Capricorn, government, all these constructive forces in our material world, which in many cases do end up being inhibiting or controlling of society. Someone said Saturn in the 12th house can often be indicative of growing up in a cult. So it's very interesting, right? Because it's like a restrictive collective space where really the inhibition is so deep, because like in a cult, there's no real individual expression there. So that's a really interesting collective manifestation of that Saturnian devil in the 12th house. So I've just gone on a big rant about Saturn in the 12th, but it's an interesting one to spend time on because of how it can potentially, how different it can be potentially at the esoteric level. And Capricorn and Pisces do have a certain connection because they are these places where the world's savior is born to some extent. The initiate is born in Capricorn, mountaintop, divine revelation, and then the saving force, the kenotic practice of love and world connection there in Pisces. And we're told in the Ageless Wisdom, in a much older iteration of our human development, there were only 10 signs, at which time Capricorn was the last. So there's a sort of affinity there with these themes of release and achievement and endings and bondage and captivity, which we see in the 12th house. We also see that with Saturn and with Capricorn there. So hopefully you can appreciate why I'd spend a little bit more time on that. Okay, let's go to Alan Oaken's house list, see what we're on par with or what I might have missed, because I didn't actually look at this yet. Okay, hidden enemies, unredeemed past karma, and the dark forces of ignorance. So we touched on that with the inversion of the psychic energies, right, that we're not claiming. 2, self-undoing, the inversion of the soul force. And that makes me think of something that I think Christ says in one of the, it might have been one of the Nag Hammadi scriptures actually, which is, if you don't bring forth what is within you, what is within you will destroy you. And that is true at the personality level of the horoscope as well when dealing with the 12th house. And then especially true at the level of the esoteric, because it's a similar thing, but now we're talking about even more magnetic force coming through with the soul. And there is something really to be said. When you work with the soul more and more and you become more competent or capable, or you're working with more spiritual energies, it's also that much more likely for, like, you take one step to the out of alignment and then like you really get that slap even more so. So the responsibility increases the more soul energy you have, and the consequences for moving out of alignment with that energy or taking proper responsibility for that energy are that much more intense. And this is why we see so many spiritual people and leaders and who mean well and they have well intention and they gain acclaim and viewership and influence, and then they just, something sabotages them. And we think, how could that happen? But it can happen to all of us, and it's something that we need to be very attuned to, because we can just think, oh, I'm just such a good person and moral and in integrity and spiritual that, you know, I'm infallible, and that's a very dangerous place to start off with anyway. But we can have little versions of this, you know, where we think we can trust ourselves. But again, it's like these 12th house matters. Anything that's like unredeemed or unresolved in the psyche, the more energy you bring forward through that personality that's coming from spiritual energies, the more that can potentially have that inversion show up, which is why psychology is so important for the spiritual path, not just the metaphysics and understanding the esoteric knowledge. I mean, how many esotericists and spiritual leaders end up just being abusers or move into cults, or even just at the lesser level, but still like they're mucking around and there's issues in their relationships, or they end up they get a sexual sacral problem, which is often the line of least resistance when you get a whole bunch of energy moving through the energetic system. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, so a little spiel there, but it's a big one to. It's reasonable to be wary of this. Yeah. 3, prisons and institutions, bondage to the personality. Yep. So again, wherever that Pluto needs to come in and cut that the egoism of the lower self, right? And if we don't do that, then it will destroy us. 5, hidden resources. All right, so we didn't really touch on that, but that's, it's implied, right? Kenotic practice, like when you claim it, then it's the gift that can give. So hidden gifts, hidden resources, esoteric level, access to the collective experiences of one's past lives. How lovely. So the shadow of the past karma and the benefit of the past karma in terms of the good karma, which would make sense because if it's a collective house or that which dissolves past the boundaries of the illusory self, then the more we sacrifice, the more we expand and become related again, we're pulling on way bigger levels of resources, which is kind of also what we just spoke about with why the inversion problem can happen too, or the sabotage. And the last one he's got here, 6, crucifixion of the personality. So there's the Piscean theme there. And the soul-centered is resurrection in service to the world saviour, which is the soul. Right. So I think we touched on most of those pretty well, and we expanded upon those ones a little bit further there as well. So all of that is to say the 12th house is a very interesting house where it comes to really the description of the endings of the personality and the potential for rebirth and lessons that need to be overcome and the gifts that can be revealed. So of course we want to look at exoteric ruler. There will be something in the exoteric ruler of the planet, as well as obviously planets in the 12th house. They're going to do the same thing, but if not, then we certainly look to the exoteric ruler as well, or instead of. And that will depict something about the release and overcoming of the challenges with the personality. And the esoteric ruler is really going to depict something about the force that needs to be claimed and brought forward. So the inhibition of that soul force, that's going to be a little bit more captured by that esoteric ruler. So yeah, there's something to think about there. Anyway, 12th house people, drop me a comment, let me know what you think and what your experience is. Give this video a thumbs up if you did like it, because it does help out the channel. And I will see you, my friends, in the next one. Thank you.